The chandelier's light caught in the rim of my glass as I stepped through the heavy oak doors, its glare almost blinding after the bitter chill outside. My heels clicked against the polished marble, each step echoing in the silence that followed the sudden drop in conversation. "She has no accomplishments. Don't give her a seat." My aunt's voice cut through the hum like a razor, her lips curled, eyes narrowing over the rim of her champagne flute. "Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us, what would you do in this situation? Be honest. Tell me in the comments below." We read every comment. Let's begin. I froze for a split second, my hand tightening around the clutch I held. Every gaze at the banquet table was on me, some pretending not to notice, others leaning in to see my reaction. My uncle chuckled, leaning back in his chair with the smug ease of someone who had always believed he was untouchable. "Let her stand. It's all she's good for," he added, tossing the words like scraps to the floor. I swallowed hard, keeping my face blank, though my pulse was hammering. My first instinct was to turn on my heel and walk out. In my mind, I could already hear the whispers trailing me, the ones they'd murmur to each other after I left. I took a step back toward the door, my eyes fixed on the deep red carpet, when a chair scraped across the floor. The sound was loud, deliberate. "Before you all regret this," my grandfather's voice boomed, steady and commanding despite his age, "let me speak." The entire table stilled. Even the waiter mid-pour froze, the dark wine trembling at the lip of the glass. My grandfather rose, his cane tapping once against the floor before he let it rest beside him. "Sit," he said, not raising his voice, but the steel in it made everyone obey. My aunt's smirk faltered. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving from his glass to the edge of the table. My grandfather's eyes locked on me, then swept slowly across the room like a spotlight. "You think you know her," he began, "but you know nothing." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a worn leather folder, the kind that didn't belong to a casual occasion. My heart thudded, confused and wary. "I have stayed silent for years," he said, "watching you all judge, mock, and dismiss her. But tonight, I won't." The weight in the room was almost physical. Even the soft clinking from the kitchen in the back seemed to fade into nothing. My aunt gave a short laugh, trying to pierce the tension. "Dad, honestly, this isn't the time." "Silence," my grandfather snapped, the crack in his voice like the crack of a whip. Her mouth closed instantly. And then he opened the folder. What I saw in his hands made my breath catch, but it was the way his eyes narrowed at the others that made the room feel like it was about to detonate. The air felt heavier as my grandfather placed the folder flat on the table, his hand resting over it like he was holding something dangerous in place. The glint in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something sharper, controlled, calculated. "You all," he began slowly, "have built your lives on the illusion that respect is inherited. That power comes from your last name, and that worth is measured by how loudly you can belittle someone." His voice was low, each word striking like a hammer. "But you forget. I was here long before you were spoiled enough to think cruelty was sophistication." No one moved. My uncle's smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch at the corner of his jaw. My aunt adjusted the pearls around her neck, her fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. Grandpa lifted the folder's flap with a deliberate slowness, pulling out a small stack of papers that looked well-worn but neatly kept. "You want to talk about accomplishments?" he asked, eyes darting between them. "Let's talk about what none of you have the courage to acknowledge." He glanced at me briefly, something like pride flickering in his gaze, then faced the table again. "She didn't ask for my help when the storm hit 2 years ago," he said, sliding the first paper across the table toward my aunt. "While you were sipping cocktails in Miami, she was out in the cold, volunteering 12 hours a day for relief efforts after the factory explosion. She organized more aid than your entire so-called charity has in a decade." A flush crept into my aunt's face, but she didn't touch the paper. My grandfather didn't wait for her to respond. "And when your business was about to fold last year, Leonard," he said, turning to my uncle, "do you know who quietly pulled strings to get the investor that saved you?" My uncle's brows drew together. "What are you talking about?" Grandpa slid another document forward, this one stamped and signed. "You're welcome. She kept her name off the deal so your pride wouldn't bruise, but you repay her by telling her to stand like some servant? My uncle's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes flicking to me, then away just as quickly. And here's the part you'll regret the most, my grandfather continued, his tone dropping even lower. You've spent years pretending she's insignificant, when in reality, he let the sentence hang, scanning each face slowly. She is the sole legal heir to the trust that funds this family's legacy. Every cent, every property, every seat you sit in at these very dinners exists because she allows it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Somewhere in the back, a waiter accidentally dropped a spoon. It clattered on the tile, startling half the room. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could feel every eye shift toward me. No longer mocking, but searching, calculating. My grandfather stepped away from the table, his cane tapping once against the marble. So, the question is not whether she deserves a seat. His gaze swept over them like a final judgment. The question is whether you deserve to sit with her. The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud ready to break. I felt my spine straighten, not from pride alone, but from the sudden, undeniable shift in power. But I also knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of stillness that made your skin prickle, the kind that came before a sudden clap of thunder. My fingers curled slightly against my clutch, not because I needed to hold on to it, but because it was the only thing grounding me as every pair of eyes at that table turned into something different. Some were wide with disbelief, others narrow, calculating, and a few, my aunts especially, burned with a hatred so sharp I could almost feel it across the room. Finally, my aunt gave a dry laugh, though her voice trembled just enough to betray her. "This is ridiculous, Dad. You're making her sound like she's running the whole family." "She is," my grandfather said flatly, not even looking at her. My uncle shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming against the tablecloth. "You expect us to believe this? You think she—" He jabbed a finger toward me without even using my name. "Has the power to control our finances? You think?" Grandpa's brows arched as he tapped the papers in front of him. "No, Leonard, I know. And you've known too. You just didn't want to see it because it's easier to keep telling yourself she's beneath you." My pulse thudded so loudly in my ears, I could barely hear my own breathing. A part of me wanted to leave, to walk out and let them stew in this humiliation. But another part, one I didn't realize was so strong, wanted to stay, to see their faces shift in real time as the truth strangled their arrogance. "I don't want her seat," my cousin suddenly piped up, voice sharp but not quite steady. "I just don't think this is the place to bring it up." "Oh." Grandpa turned toward him, his tone ice cold. "And when would be the right time? At her funeral? So you can pretend to mourn while congratulating yourselves that you never once respected her when she was alive?" That shut him up instantly. I felt my jaw tighten as my gaze swept over them. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. "None of you ever asked me what I've been doing these past few years. You just decided I wasn't worth your time. And now that you realize I'm not the helpless girl you think I am, you're scrambling to rewrite the narrative." A muscle in my uncle's cheek twitched. My aunt's lips pressed into a thin line. Grandpa leaned slightly on his cane and gave me a small nod, just enough to let me know he was giving me the floor. "So, here's my decision," I continued, the words spilling out smoother than I expected. "You don't get to decide whether I belong here. I decide whether you belong in my life. And right now," I let my eyes sweep the table one more time, "you're not making a strong case." The waiter appeared again, uncertain, holding a tray of champagne flutes. The tension in the air was so thick, even he hesitated before setting it down. My aunt opened her mouth like she wanted to say something cutting, but Grandpa's voice cut her off before she could speak. "Careful," he warned her softly, though it was loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're already hanging by a thread." The room seemed smaller now, the walls inching in as every single person there realized the hierarchy had shifted, and there was no going back. The weight of the room pressed against me, not in a way that suffocated, but in a way that fueled something I hadn't felt in years: control. For the first time in this family's carefully choreographed power games, I wasn't the one scrambling to keep my balance. Grandpa eased himself back into his chair, the creak of the wood echoing in the thick air. He didn't look at me, but I caught the faint curve of a smile tugging at his mouth. He knew exactly what he'd done. handed me the wheel, and stepped out of the driver's seat. I let the silence hang for a moment longer. Let them squirm. Let the realization sink in. The only sound was the faint ticking of the ornate wall clock and the occasional clink of cutlery from another table across the hall. "You know," I said slowly, my voice carrying across the table, "when I walked in here tonight, I was ready to stand in the back and slip out early. I thought, it's just another night of pretending I don't hear the comments, pretending I'm not invisible." But now, I leaned forward slightly, meeting my aunt's cold stare. "I realized the only reason you wanted me invisible is because you were afraid of what might happen if I wasn't." Her jaw tightened. She reached for her glass, but her hand wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be. "You've spent years making sure I was left out of conversations, out of opportunities, out of this family's decisions," I continued, turning my gaze to my uncle, "but you never considered that one day, the person you dismissed might hold all the cards." "That's enough," my uncle said sharply, but his voice cracked just enough to betray him. "No," I said, the single word cutting through the air like a blade. "It's not enough. Not yet." I turned to the waiter, who had been hovering nervously by the side. "Could you bring me another chair?" My tone was calm, almost casual. "It seems my seat was misplaced." The waiter nodded quickly, disappearing and returning moments later with a high-backed chair, setting it at the head of the table. At my grandfather's table. Gasps rippled across the group, subtle but unmistakable. No one sat at the head unless Grandpa invited them. And tonight, he didn't have to. I sat down, slow and deliberate, every movement a statement. Grandpa's eyes flicked toward me briefly, approving before returning to his untouched plate. I placed my clutch on the table, folded my hands, and looked at each of them in turn. "We can do one of two things," I said. "We can enjoy this dinner like civilized people, or I can start reading the rest of the documents in that folder out loud." My aunt's nostrils flared. "You wouldn't?" "Try me," I interrupted, my voice as calm as it was dangerous. The color drained from her face. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, running a hand down the front of his jacket as if smoothing out creases that weren't there. My cousin stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes entirely. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one bracing for impact. They were, and I was just getting started. I let my words settle like smoke in the air. Slow, suffocating, unavoidable. The kind that seeps into your clothes and skin no matter how far you try to run from it. My aunt finally set her glass down, her manicured nails tapping against the stem in an uneven rhythm. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said, her tone bitter. But there was something underneath. Fear. I tilted my head slightly, not smiling, not frowning. "No," I said evenly. "I'm not enjoying watching my own family choke on the truth. But I am enjoying the fact that for once, you can't talk over me." My uncle shifted in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "All right," he said gruffly. "You've made your point." "No, Leonard," Grandpa interjected, his voice low but firm. "She's making your point. All these years, you've acted like you were the pillars of this family, when in reality, you've been leaning on her without even knowing it." I could feel their resentment boiling just beneath the surface, but none of them dared to explode. It would only confirm everything I'd just said. I reached for the folder Grandpa had left on the table, sliding it toward me. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, the scent of old paper escaping as I opened it. I didn't even need to look inside. The weight of it was enough. "There's a list in here," I said, my gaze sweeping the table. "It's a list of every time I stepped in, every time I fixed something, every time I quietly made sure you didn't lose what you had. I never asked for credit. I never demanded thanks. But from this moment on," I paused, letting the words hang, "you will never again mistake my silence for weakness." The clock ticked once, twice. No one spoke. My aunt opened her mouth, but Grandpa lifted a hand, silencing her instantly. "You've all had your turn to speak," he said. "Now you'll listen. And when she's done, you'll decide if you want to be part of her circle, or watch from the outside." I leaned back in the chair, the head seat, my seat now, and looked at each of them as if I were memorizing their faces for the last time. "Here's how it's going to work. I'm not here to destroy anyone tonight, though I could, and you all know it. But from now on, I decide who gets invited into my life. That includes business, family gatherings, and any access to the resources you've all been so comfortable enjoying. The color drained from my cousin's face. My uncle's gaze dropped to his plate. My aunt's lip trembled, but she clenched her jaw to keep it still. You've treated me like an outsider for years, I continued, my voice soft but carrying through the room. So I'm giving you a taste of it. You'll earn your way back into my trust, the way I had to earn my place at this table, even though it was mine all along. Grandpa gave a small, approving nod. Well said. The waiter returned, setting down fresh plates of food that no one touched. The scent of roasted herbs and wine sauce filled the air, but the tension made it impossible to enjoy. I reached for my glass, taking a slow sip, letting the quiet drag on. Then I set it down, pushing my chair back just enough to stand. Dinner's on me tonight, I said simply, glancing at the stunned faces one last time. Consider it the last free meal you get from me without earning it. I turned to leave, the marble cool under my heels, each step a steady drumbeat of finality. The heavy doors opened, the faint chill of the night brushing against my skin. Behind me, the murmur of voices started again, low, uneasy, desperate. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. They'd remember this night for the rest of their lives, and so would I.